You've got ideas, you've got ambition, you've got no time, or so you think. I'm Marissa Lonick, and I help busy moms with big dreams and no time. Join me each week as I dive into time management strategies, goal setting and achieving framework, and inspiring guests who are juggling mom life, work life, fill in the blank life. Dreams don't work unless you do, and just because you're a mom doesn't mean you can't still make it happen, whatever it means to you. Welcome to the Mama Work It podcast. Hello, mamas, and welcome back to another episode of the Mama Work It podcast. I am excited to be chatting with Dr. Susan Landers today on the show, all about working mom challenges, particularly if you work in the medical field. And I know many of our listeners do. So Susan is a retired neonatologist, author, and speaker. She worked for 34 years in the NICU and is the author of So Many Babies, My Life Balancing a Busy Medical Career and Motherhood. As a veteran working mom of 3 now grown children, Susan is here to share her wisdom, her stories, her lessons learned about how she thrived as a working mom and physician for over 30 years. Susan, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. It's really a pleasure. I like getting a chance to meet you.
Great. Okay. Well, first things first, please tell us a little bit more about you and what prompted you to write this book.
I practiced neonatology for 34 years. I loved being a physician and I loved being a mom. 2 years before I retired, I was burned out. I think I had had just a little bit too much NICU, too many nights on call, too many really sick babies that may not have responded to therapy. And so I began to write about my experience as a way to heal my burnout. I went to work part-time at the very end of my career, the last 2 years, and I began to exercise more. I visited with friends. I picked up old hobbies. I started playing the piano. And over the course of 2 years with my writing, I felt better. I recovered from my burnout. And then I was ready to retire. So I had begun telling stories of my favorite patients during that recovery process. And then I realized that their parents had been very inspirational, very courageous, had meant a lot to me throughout my career. And I said, well, why don't I just write a book? Why don't I just tell some NICU stories to give people a look at what it's really like to work in the NICU. Nurses and doctors are always saying, oh, they don't really get what we do. And everybody has a baby and everybody knows what it's like in labor and delivery. And most people have an idea of what it's like to have a newborn. But if you're not one of the unlucky 10% who have a sick baby that needs NICU care, you may not have any idea of what life is like in the NICU. So I wanted the stories of my special patients to describe that life and how hard we worked to help those children get better. So that's how the book got started. Then the ladies in my book club said, well, why don't you tell stories about your own motherhood experience? Like being a physician mom, that's kind of hard, isn't it? And I said, oh yeah, it was so hard. And they said, well, write your stories about being a mom, put them together with your stories about your patients. And that's how the book came to life.
Interesting. Okay. So it was sort of like the people around you inspired you to take that step. Like at first it was therapeutic for you to be writing about that. And I have to say, Susan, I can 100% relate to this because when I was feeling really stressed, really overwhelmed, I took to starting my blog at that time. And it was my creative outlet that led me one step, here, one step there, to my book, to all those things. So I can relate 100%. I
Good.
think it's I think it's good for listeners to hear this, because when you're so busy as a working mom, you often think, well, what can I take off my plate? Right? And that's not the wrong thing to think by any means. Of course, it makes logical sense. But also, what can you add that's going to bring you some joy? What can you add that's going to be your outlet, your creative outlet? We are creative as people, no matter how uncreative you think we are. Creativity is a really important thing to have and to exercise regularly. So,
It is. It
yeah.
is. And I enjoyed picking up cross stitch again. I enjoyed playing the piano. I'm not very good at it. I even joined a handbell choir at my church and started, ringing handbells. I wasn't very good at it, but I learned. And so all of those things were, in fact, creative. They allowed me to use a different right brain, way different from decisions I was making at work, and writing about my feelings and my experiences in the NICU was also very, very stress relieving.
Yeah.
It was very helpful for me to look back, make sense of certain cases and certain situations. I'm sorry to say that I didn't have the time to do that until I went part-time right before I retired. I think if working moms can do a little bit along the way, it would help them. If it's not writing, at least they can do a hobby, or they can do something with friends, or they can get together in a discussion group and talk to each other about how things are going. There are lots of different ways to be creative when you're working full tilt. I was lucky that I had enough time to really devote to the writing.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's great that you were able at that stage. I mean, you had done it for over 30 years full time. So, it was your time to scale back. If you're like our listeners, if you're a working mom in the thick of it and you're working full time and it's not an option for you to go part time, or you don't want to go part time, that doesn't mean you still can't find the time to make the things you love happen. I am a prime example of this. I know many other moms out there that are doing this. You can do it. Um,
Right.
I'm excited to be talking with you. I love the fact that you worked in the NICU. I am a 10% mom. I had twin
Oh,
babies.
really?
I had twin babies as my first babies. They spent a week in the NICU. Thankfully, they were not very sick, just small, small, and needed some support with their temperature control. But I
Right.
can attest to how stressful it was being a parent in the NICU. So I can understand, as the true caregivers there that are 24/7 round the clock, like really responsible for the health of that baby during their time in the hospital, how stressful that must be.
Well, it's not stressful unless the babies are so sick and don't respond to therapy. But the biggest stress, not really for us, for kids like your twins, is for the parents. I mean, it is scary to have a kid in the NICU. You don't know where it is. There are all these wires and tubes. There are monitors going off. You don't even know if you can touch your child. I mean, luckily your twins weren't very sick. They were probably in an incubator or an
Yes.
isolette, maybe had an IV or a feeding tube. But some babies are really tiny and really sick, and parents feel like they can't even reach out and touch them. And so I like to, and of course the nursing staff always do, try to help moms and dads adjust to this scary, challenging situation that is having a baby in the NICU. I like to say, this is horrible. You're going to feel bad. You're going to be scared. Some moms even feel guilty. They shouldn't. It's not their fault. And everything is going to take an adjustment. And I like to prepare them and kind of help them along in the journey of having a baby in the NICU. Like, imagine if your twins had been in the NICU for 2 months, the strain that would place on your marriage, for example. sometimes I would say to a mom or a nurse, a bedside nurse she's here all the time. She and her husband are never together. She goes home exhausted. She comes back every morning. I would like to say things to the mom like, you really need to take a date night with your husband. We'll call you if there's any change. So there were a lot of things that I could do as a mom and as a married woman to help NICU moms and dads adjust to the NICU situation. And I really enjoyed that.
There's a whole nother layer to that, that particular department in the medical field, I bet.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about you as a physician mother. You raised 3 kids during the course of your career. Why do you feel, or what were your challenges that maybe are a bit different than just any working mother?
The biggest challenge is schedule and time. And when I took night call in the hospital, I was lucky to be married to a physician whose practice was mainly in the daytime hours. And he was really good about doing everything for the kids when I wasn't there. And of course, I had a full-time nanny. You can't work 60 hours a week anywhere, much less a NICU, if you don't have great childcare. So we were privileged to be able to afford a full-time nanny, and he handled everything when I wasn't there. But that didn't mean kids didn't get sick, or there wasn't a special thing at school, or there was a teacher meeting, or something else called me away from the unit. And so, like any working mom, I used my partners to cover for me when I needed to. I used friends to give me advice about how to deal with a male partner that might not be very sympathetic to the working mom issues, because that still exists. I had some partners that were resentful of pediatricians taking maternity leave in my practice.
Wow.
I mean, really, it's not the same for working women that it is for working men. I'll never forget, my older daughter had strep when she was 10 years old. And I called in sick because she was very ill. She was 103 fever. I knew she had strep. She needed to go to the doctor and get a prescription. And one of my partners complained and said, I cannot believe you're staying home with a sick child. And I'm going, look, she's sicker than all my patients. I need to get her the care she needs. But it surprised me that he had such little understanding of how a working mom feels when they are split between work and their children. So the first thing is that I had great help with childcare, with a nanny. The second was my husband was really a trooper. He was the biggest cook in our house. He eventually took over all the grocery shopping and cooking, and that became something he did with the kids. But I did everything else. All the school stuff, all the play dates, all the sleepovers, all the teacher meetings, all the soccer uniforms, on and on and on. And so as a working mom, I still had to give responsibilities and duties to him. Luckily, the nanny did the pick up and drop off and laundry and things like that. But as any working mom, I had to pick my battles. I had to ask for help. I would ask my friends at work, how did you handle this? Does your husband do this? Have you had trouble with this? And we would talk about it. My mom's support group was very important. It was just critical. I had a group of friends, and we had all gotten married around the same time, and we had all started having babies. We were all physicians, and we would look at each other going, man, this is a lot harder than we thought this was going to be. I mean, all working moms are a little bit astonished at how difficult some days are to be one place and not another. I think that's universal. And I tried to tell the stories of my motherhood challenges in my book to give examples of those kind of situations, because I think all working moms struggle with that.
Yeah, I agree. I think no matter how much practice you get at delegating and, feeling like you can say no to certain things and setting some boundaries and all the things that we're told day in and day out, self-care, like all of it, no matter how good you get at those things, you still have a little bit of that mom guilt that you tend to feel, even though you're doing your best, even though you're doing all the things, you're reading all the books, you're talking to all the right people, you have the most supportive partner potentially, you still get that twinge of guilt even now.
Yes, yes, I do. The other thing I wanted to mention, I'm guilty of working too much as a physician mom. I would let my practice get 60 hours a week of work from me, and because I loved what I did. But at least when things were really crazy, I cut back to 3/4 time. Once when we moved from a different city to Austin, I went part-time so I could get all the kids settled into school. All three of them were in a different school. My youngest had dyslexia. She needed all this testing and all this special education services. Then later, when I was quite a bit older, my older daughter got in trouble as a junior in high school. She developed an eating disorder. I was terrified. And of course, I read everything I could get my hands on about the condition and talked to experts. But I said to my husband, I've got to cut back my work. Anne needs help. I have got to get her the help she needs. And my practice was nice. They let me cut back to 3/4 time so that I had enough free days, free afternoons to take her to therapy, to take her to see the nutritionist. I was determined to be there for her during that really crazy time. And I think because we identified it really early and because I personally shepherded her along, she recovered within about 6 months.
Wow.
But it was a scary situation, and I would not have been able to manage that working 60 hours a week. No way.
Of course. Yeah, of course. And I want to mention here because I'm gonna go out on a limb and I'm gonna assume this is a thought that crossed your mind, Susan, when this happened. I'm gonna assume that you potentially thought, gosh, if I wasn't working so much, could I have prevented this? Because I think a lot of moms will think that when things pop up with their kids.
I always thought that. I always thought, how did I miss this? Why couldn't I have seen it sooner? Maybe I should have been home more and this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. And I want to say to that, hey, even stay-at-home moms, even moms, helicopter moms, even the moms that are all up in their kids' business, things happen in those families too. Things happen in those families too. So, of course, if you are feeling the pull, the urge that you need to be dedicating more hours in the week, more time with, sitting there with your kids, whatever it is, away from work, make that change if that's what you're feeling. But if you're not, it's okay. It's okay. And then if and when these things pop up, it doesn't mean it's because you made that choice, right? Or it doesn't mean it's because you weren't around.
Oh, I agree. Things happen. Children get illnesses. Children have diseases. Conditions develop. And you may have a harder time with a kid as a teenager and they were the best little toddler ever.
Right.
You just don't know what you're going to be faced with throughout the long haul of raising kids. And it really can be a surprise, but it's not our fault. Working women should not feel guilty because most working women want to work, hopefully feel fulfilled in their work, and their working makes them a better mom.
Yes.
I really believe that when you're doing something that you think is valuable, then when you go home, you're a much better person for your spouse and for your children.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Okay, I had a thought. It left my mind. The mom
Uh-oh.
brain is real, you guys. So let's
Mom
jump
brain.
let's jump to another question here. So you kind of talked a little bit about how when you went part-time, you were able to incorporate more hobbies and, you felt more balanced. What about during the time that you were working the 60-hour weeks and you had the young kids at home? How did you find the work-life balance then?
It was difficult. My husband and I benefited from a couple support group that a psychiatrist in Houston, who was also a Methodist minister, started. It was called Healing the Healers. His theory, and we met every other Sunday afternoon, talked with other couples that were medical couples. His theory was that we needed to support each other and talk about our feelings, and that would make us better parents and better members of a married couple. I was always good at running. I could always just go outside once he got home and run 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes we tried working out together. In another city, we joined a health club that had great services for children, and we used to go there as a whole family. That was a good idea. The other thing I did was when I wasn't at work, I was all about my kids. We got out in the yard and we played t-ball or softball or catch, or we went down to the neighborhood pool and swam. I got my exercise by chasing them around and helping them learn sports. So that was one way I was able to get some work-life balance. Talking to other women going through the same thing, especially moms that I met at school who were not physicians, that helped me so much because we all were sharing the same kind of struggles. Oh gosh, she's really lousy at basketball. Why are we doing this? Or, oh, she didn't get invited to the birthday party. What are we going to do now? And you can really talk with other moms about your issues, and that helps relieve the stress. So the way I conquered work-life balance was talking with my husband and other physician couples, getting outside and playing with my kids a lot, running. Later, I developed an exercise routine. I would go to a health club 2 days a week. And talking with other mom friends. Everywhere I've lived, I've had a group of mom friends. Most of them were not physicians, some were. And we kept each other afloat by talking about issues.
Yeah, it's so important to have a group like that, that you can vent to, that you can ask for advice to, all those things. I have a question about the group that you were going to with your husband, because I love the idea of that, and I think a lot of moms do too. What if your husband isn't excited about that opportunity? Was your husband all for it?
Men don't grow up willing to talk about their feelings like women do. And it was a struggle for that group to get off the ground. It was the women who did the heavy carrying, but the facilitator was a man. And he kept trying to pull the men out, and he kept trying to get them to talk. And he would throw out things that he knew were an issue with working couples. And so they slowly came around.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we met every other Sunday afternoon and evening for about 3 years, I think it took about 2 years before people really, really opened up. And this was in a facilitated support group.
Wow.
So men just don't do it as easily as we do. They really like to go off on their own and kind of be quiet and think about things. We do exactly the opposite. We want to talk to a friend, get it out, work through it, try to understand it. And so it is hard if you want your husband to do a support group with you or to be in a couples group. you may have to drag him kicking and screaming. But if his peers are there, if his friends are there, he'll be more likely to participate.
Yeah. Okay. That's good advice because I do think there's a lot of hesitation or resistance on the husband front often for things like that. Like, for example, after my third son was born, I wanted my husband to take the love languages assessment with me. And,
Yeah.
he was not excited about doing that. So I read the questions aloud. I did all the work, I figured out his score. But it got done. It got done.
Good for you. Yeah, I gave my husband that book, The Five Love Languages.
Did he read it?
And he read it. He took the little test and he said, "Here it is. And you need to understand that." And I went, "Okay, thanks." And of course, we were both different.
Yes.
It was really great. It was a great experience.
Yeah.
We still talk about that. We still talk about what our love languages are. And because I love words of affirmation and he could care less, but he's really good at giving gifts. That's how he shows his love, by giving gifts.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. My husband was always a good balance for me, with me. I'm very outgoing and impulsive and energetic, and he's way more laid back and more laissez-faire and more kind of mull things over. And so he was the perfect antidote to my freaking out if something went wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Understood.
It really was. And I just wish every working woman is married to a man that's right for her, that helps her raise her children.
Yeah, it's really important to have support, whether that's in your partner, in your parents, your in-laws, your friends. I mean, whoever is in your village, right? It's important to lean on that support because you absolutely need it as a working mom, no matter what age your kids are. Because I've got little kids here. I know a lot of listeners have little kids, but the problems remain sometimes, at the old, maybe even bigger the older they get, I'd imagine. So it's really good to have that support system in place.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it's so important.
Okay, great. Well, Susan, we are going to move on now to the lightning round part of our show. This is when I get to ask some just for fun, random questions so our listeners can get to know you a little bit more personally. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. This is very, very important. I want to know. Nail salon, hair salon, or spa. You can only pick one place to visit for the rest of your life. Which one is it?
Oh, it has to be hair salon. I used to have very bright red hair, and it's really changed color over the years, and it's kind of beginning to go white in places. So I have to have a color that blends well. I'm sorry to admit that. But...
Yes. No, I'm with you. I never want to go gray. Ever. Okay. If you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be? Calories don't count.
I think it's spaghetti with the tomato and meat sauce. It's just one of my favorite comfort foods. My mother made it. I made it. My kids love it. It's just makes me feel satisfied and happy.
Yeah, that's a good choice. That's a good choice. What's your cocktail of choice?
I used to drink Chardonnay wine, but I quit drinking right after I retired because it was beginning to affect my sleep and it was beginning to give me gastritis and indigestion. So, but I do love Chardonnay wine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What is one app you cannot live without?
I love the Calm app, CALM. It is, I think, the best app out there for learning to meditate, for learning mindfulness, for listening to inspiring stories. I don't use it for the music much, but I think it's great. It helps me meditate when I have free moments, because I'm not one of these people who can meditate on my own. I have to be listening and concentrating. I've never been very good at meditation, but I have learned mindfulness, and I think that app is great for that.
Great. Yeah. Any other, just before we wrap up, any other like final advice you'd want to give to working moms listening, especially those who potentially are physicians or nurses or work in the medical field and are really vibing with the experience that you have had over those 30 years?
My advice would be to say to yourself what you're doing is hard and give yourself some grace. If you're in the medical field, you're always being compassionate. You're always giving yourself to others. And that really can take a toll. And so you have to take care of yourself and give yourself a little space and a little grace. You're working hard. I think any working mom that works hard, whether she's a lawyer or an accountant or a marketing exec or an IT person, you're going to get tired. And you need to say to yourself, being a working mom is hard, no matter what your job is. You can't be in two places at once. You have to work like you don't have children, and you have to have children as if there's no work that you're thinking about. And so we sometimes expect too much from ourselves as working moms. That little bit of grace, that little extra space, that little important nugget of self-care with a friend, with your spouse, with the Calm app, whatever, helps people to keep going.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right. Well, before we wrap up this episode officially, please tell our listeners where they can find you.
Oh, thanks. I have a website, SusanLandersMD.com. All of my social media accounts are accessible there. And I have a blog there and some other resources for parents. My blog posts are about sort of ideas that general pediatricians would want parents to know, co-sleeping and alcohol and breastfeeding and eating disorders, things like that. So they can check it out there. Everything is linked to my website. Wonderful. And my new book is there too. I didn't get to mention my new book, So Many Babies, My Life, Balancing a Busy Medical Career in Medicine. And if you want to hear some really typical mom stories, they'll be in my book.
Yes, definitely. Well, thanks again, Susan, for being a guest. This was a great chat.
Oh, thank you so much, Marissa.
You've been listening to the Mama Work It podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and would love if you could take a quick minute to leave me a review on whichever platform you're listening from, and maybe even send a note to a fellow mama friend recommending it. Reviews and recs help this podcast grow and reach more like-minded, awesome moms. And if you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click that button so we can stay in touch, girl. By the way, if you haven't checked out the Mama Work It website, please do. There are lots of free resources and great articles there that can help you with the juggle of work life, mom life, wife life, fill in the blank life. So head on over. Thanks again for being part of the tribe. I'll see you soon, but in the meantime, keep on working it, mama.